Hi everyone, welcome to the BioEdge.
Last time we asked ourselves, why is it that land tortoises don't exist in Australia? And we pointed out that the obvious answer, the answer that most biologists and biogeographers would assume to be self-evident, is that Australia, as the most isolated continent of all, simply wasn't reached by land tortoises because the sea barrier between Southeast Asia and Australia is simply too wide. Now, last time we looked at that concept of sea barrier called Wallace's line, and we really demolished it in 7 steps. I mean, we looked at 7 different hidden facts about land tortoises in this region that showed that there really was no convincing sea barrier, and that maybe the real reason is that although land tortoises have reached Australia on numerous occasions in the past, they simply haven't taken here because the ecology of this continent is not suitable for them. If that's so, well, what are the ecological factors that would make Australia an unsuitable continent for land tortoises? Well, the obvious one is fire. Australia really is the continent of fire. And, that's brought out most starkly when you compare Australia with South America, which is a comparable ex-Gondwanan continent. In South America, there is some fire in savannas such as the Cerrado, but it really isn't a continent of fire in the same sense that Australia is. In Australia, most parts of the continent burn from time to time, and the only extensive parts of Australia that are free of fire are the salty bits. Australia is a salty continent in its low-lying interior areas, and where the vegetation is dominated by semi-succulent halophytic plants like salt bushes, atriplex, and other members of the Amaranthaceae, you can't really have a fire because the vegetation is permanently too moist, and there's not really enough grass even in dry times to carry a fire. And in those kinds of landforms, Australia is fairly fire-free, but in most other parts of Australia, you really get intense fires, not necessarily frequent fires, but intense fires, and it's an Achilles heel in the body design and way of life of land tortoises that they're very vulnerable to fire. Now, the way that land tortoises in other parts of the world get around the fire problem is best exemplified in North America, where in the genus Gopherus, the gopher tortoises, you have a situation where these tortoises live perfectly well in a fire-prone place, like the pine barrens that you find in the southeastern United States, typically in Florida. And what happens is that these tortoises adopt a very seasonal way of life, where they have deep burrows that they make for themselves, and where they go underground for up to 6 months of the year and pass the dry season in a state of torpor. Now, where you have that kind of situation, of course, the fire can rage at ground level, and the tortoise isn't going to get hurt because it's switched off and it's underground and buried. But where the tortoise has to forage during the fire season, it's a different matter, and the fire regime of Australia really can be lethal to tortoises on a large scale. Now, you might ask, well, why didn't the tortoises live in these saltbush areas? Well, here another physiological factor comes in, and that is that if you're going to go underground and estivate or hibernate or become dormant, you don't want to do so in an environment where you've got a lot of sodium in your tissues because you've been eating sodium-rich plants. Because one of the problems with that kind of estivation is that your body doesn't work really well if it's full of sodium. And so what we're suggesting here is a kind of a between a rock and a hard place scenario, where the few fire-free bits of Australia were just too saline to enable the kind of estivation or dormancy that we see in North American tortoises. And it could be then that although various kinds of land tortoises arrived again and again across the sea from Timor, landing on the northern Australian coastline, particularly during the lowest sea levels of the ice ages, these animals just never took, because they could never find a substantial enough bit of habitat that was fire-free enough and also free of salinity enough to allow them to evolve and proliferate. And in that sense, then, the obvious sea barrier, which is such an appealing concept, has less explanatory power than the barrier of fire and the barrier of salinity and the kind of synergy that you get when you put fire and salinity together, which might be an ecological explanation as opposed to the explanation based on a historical accident for the absence of a group, the land tortoises, which is really famous for having colonized islands elsewhere, most famously the Galapagos, but also the Aldabras and various North Atlantic islands and so on. And so that's all from Exploring the BioEdge for today. Look forward to seeing you next time.